like to kick off this video by congratulating you on all of your hard work. You guys are doing a phenomenal job. I have to say that I really enjoy reading and grading your assignments and your discussion board. And that's simply a reflection of how much hard work that you're putting into it and how much thoughtfulness you're putting into application of the course content to some specific examples. And, you know, I'm just really proud of you and impressed with you, because all along I've been saying this is a difficult course. I know that it's difficult. It's very fast-paced. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We are actually over the halfway point, so you're almost there. This week we are going to be reading chapters 10 and 13 in your textbook. And I like reading those chapters together because those chapters provide a really nice comparison of experimental versus quasi-experimental design. So what do we mean when we say quasi? If something's quasi, it has the appearance of something without actually being that thing. So quasi-experimental has the appearance of being experimental, has the appearance of an experimental design without actually being an experimental design. So what exactly is the difference between experimental design and quasi-experimental design? An experimental design is based on random assignment of participants to conditions, whereas a quasi-experimental design does not involve random assignment of participants to conditions, either because it's not possible or it's not ethical to do so. So what do I mean by random assignment? Well, once I've recruited my sample of participants who represent the population of interest, imagine that I have this sample, this group of participants, individuals who have volunteered to participate in my study. Random assignment to conditions means that each participant has an equal likelihood, an equal chance, an equal probability of being assigned to one condition versus another. For example, to a treatment condition versus a control. So it's basically like flipping a coin. When you flip a coin, you have a 50-50 probability, 50-50 chance of getting heads or tails. And it's just random. If all else being equal, if all the conditions remain constant, the likelihood of flipping heads or tails should be random, should be 50-50, just by chance. So imagine that I have my sample, and for each participant, I flip a coin to determine what condition they're going to be in. Participant A, I flip a coin heads. Okay, you're in the treatment condition. Participant B, I flip a coin tails. Oh, okay, you're in the control condition. So each participant has an equal likelihood of being in a treatment condition versus a control condition. In quasi-experimental design, it's either not possible or not ethical to randomly assign participants to conditions. So there are many examples of situations in which we cannot randomly assign participants to groups. Gender is an example. We can't randomly assign participants to be male, female, transgender. Age is another example. Culture is an example. We cannot randomly assign participants to those groups. In some cases, we might imagine that it's possible to randomly assign participants to groups, but it's not ethical. For example, if we wanted to investigate the influence of sun exposure on skin cancer, it's not ethical to randomly assign some participants to be exposed to the sun in order to determine whether or not they will develop skin cancer. If we were interested in studying the effect of substance abuse and addiction on mental health, it would not be ethical to randomly assign participants to either abuse substances and ultimately become dependent on substance. Because as psychologists especially, we're trying to help people. We're not trying to induce addiction. So the quasi-experimental design, it has the appearance of an experimental design because we have an independent variable. Maybe cultural group is our independent variable. Maybe dependence on substances, on alcohol and drugs is an independent variable, where we can compare groups, individuals who belong to one cultural group versus another, individuals who are struggling with dependence on alcohol versus individuals who are not. So we're comparing groups, we have an independent variable, but we didn't randomly assign participants to groups. So it has the appearance of being an experimental design, but it's not a true experiment because we cannot, or because it's unethical to randomly assign participants to groups. In my own research, I've conducted both types of studies. I've conducted experimental research and quasi-experimental research. An example of an experimental study that I've conducted is a study in which I randomly assigned participants to either meditating in nature or just simply spending time in nature. We were interested in determining whether allocation of attention and how you pay attention in a natural environment affects your perceived connectedness to nature, or the extent to which you perceive yourself to be a part of nature. And this was important and relevant given a growing body of research showing that perceived connectedness to nature has important implications for other aspects of well-being and mental health. And so our participants spent time in nature. So they would, for example, participate in outdoor adventure trips. And we randomly assigned them to either meditate first thing in the morning or not. And it was ethical to do so because meditating in nature won't hurt them. And then if they don't meditate in nature, that won't really hurt them either. And it was also feasible, it was possible. We can randomly assign participants to either meditate or not. In the meditation group, we had individuals who are trained to lead meditation in nature every morning. And we compared the two groups. What we found is that participants who meditated in nature had higher ratings of perceived self-nature interconnectedness than participants who spent time in nature without meditating. So that example is what we call a between subjects design. And we call it between subjects because you're comparing between two groups, two different groups, with different participants in one group compared to the other group. We could have conducted that study as a within subjects comparison, in which we had participants complete an assessment before their experience in nature and after their experience in nature. That would be a pre- and post assessment. We would call it within subjects because we're comparing within that sample, within the same group of participants. Within subjects design is also called repeated measures design, which makes sense because we're repeatedly measuring our variable within that one sample. So, two important things to pull out of this short video. There's a difference between experimental design and quasi-experimental design. Experimental design involves random assignment of participants to conditions. Quasi-experimental design has the appearance of experimental because we're comparing groups, so we have a clear independent variable, but we are not able to randomly assign participants to groups, either because it's not possible or it's not ethical. However, within both types of designs, we could conduct our research either as between subjects or within subjects. And it doesn't matter whether the research is experimental or quasi-experimental. Within each type of design, we could also implement either a between subjects or within subjects design.